All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Of course, we're going to go into topics from at least starting now, and we'll go back to reviews here and there, right? But, I think we should review something real quick, which is our favorite serial killers. Brian, I love all the little dick serial killers, like all the nasty, motherfucking, disgusting serial killers, right?
Oh,
And
the
what's even
sick
better,
piece of shit.
these sick pieces of shit. What's even better is honoring, not mocking, honoring the victims of these serial killers by giving them the respect they deserve, which is being really
Yeah, the
coy about it
victims
and
who,
talking about it.
well, those victims who died in the most pathetic, miserable positions that they didn't deserve and who will only be remembered forever as a powerless splatter of blood crushed like a bunch of grapes under Lucy's bare feet. Yeah, I love
Exactly.
honoring them. I have so much respect for them.
And before we get to that, Brian, let's get into a Blue Chew ad real quick. But no, really, like, if that intro didn't give you an indication of what this episode is going to be about, it's going to be about true crime. I would say the good and the bad of true crime, right, Brian? Because there is good and bad true crime.
Yeah, there's good and bad true crime. I think for our purposes, right, what's really interesting is like how popular it got. Like for a few years there, Jesus Christ. But also just like, obviously, we talk about kind of the passage of time and how that affects art and how it's perceived. True crime had kind of a really gradual metamorphosis into what we now know it as.
No, 100%. So, but before we get into our topic this week, Brian, let's bring back once again our segment, Cringe Generational, Cringe Millennial Moment of the
Cringe? Generational moment?
Week.
Weak.
Woo!
I'm cringing
Yeah!
already, Taylor.
Oh, Brian, you're going to be motherfucking cringing because for this week, for the very first Cringe Generational, Cringe Millennial segment of a topical episode, I'm actually not going to cover anything that's involving the topic that we're covering this week. But, Brian, this movie has become very infamous within the last few weeks, and I told you about it the other day. Brian, we have to talk a little bit about the Ice Cube War of the Worlds movie, just for a little bit. It is so cringe.
Well,
It is
it's so
amazing.
perfect. It's so perfect. Literally, I think the day before you messaged me to tell me you were watching it, I had tried to watch it the night before. I watched about 10 minutes. I like watching a bad movie. I was hanging out with a friend. We watch bad movies. We kind of, the same way you and I do. We make fun of them and we talk about them when we watch them. And it was too bad.
It's one of those movies, and I talked about it in some of the other bad movies we've covered, like The Fanatic, and other movies like even Funny Man to a certain extent. Even though Funny Man's a great movie, but it is kind of a so bad it's good movie. But the thing with the War of the Worlds movie is it's just a bad movie. It's not so bad it's good, and there are moments in it that are like hilariously incompetent. But it's a movie that has very little ambition, and it's also bad. That's just a bad movie. That's just the fact of the matter. Like, people are like, oh, this is the new fucking Troll 2. And it's like, no, it's not. It's not nearly
Well, no,
that
Troll
good.
2 is a movie that was lovingly made by people who the thing with the so bad it's good movie is really it has to be made with love, but it also has to have, I think, sort of a degree of competence to it, right? Even something like Troll 2 or The Room, you can tell the people that made it tried to apply things they learned. They like weren't really being lazy with it, right?
Exactly, but War of the Worlds is extremely lazy. It is a COVID movie to the core, because,
It's a webcam movie.
it is. This was filmed in September of 2020, so this is like right in the middle of COVID, basically. And you can fucking tell. You can tell.
The thing is, that there was some fucking. Do you remember the very start of the COVID lockdowns when everyone felt very patriotic for staying at home and watching Netflix all the time and ordering DoorDash?
They're like, you're saving lives by staying home. And it's like, maybe, but
I mean,
probably
maybe,
not.
but it's like also like maybe fucking don't pat yourself on the back so much for it because half you people only do that anyways.
Yeah,
But no,
well,
you
and
know
then
that
you
there
get
are
fucking
people when
delivery
this
from
came out.
DoorDash, so it's okay to put DoorDash
Yeah,
drivers in harm's way, but not you, you stupid
yeah,
asshole.
exactly. But you know that some of those people saw this movie and they, because it was made with COVID protocols in mind, they were like, it's really impressive what they did given the circumstances. And it's not. Even just that little bit I watched, the whole thing is webcam screens, right?
Yep, it's webcam screens. I think there's only two characters that ever actually interact with each other, and they're like a couple. But otherwise than that, nobody interacts with each other face to face in person in this movie. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, well, you could mine that for some, interesting, I guess, artistic decisions, I suppose. But this movie does not do that at all. It does literally nothing with that.
Yeah, you could do that if you were doing something kind of psychological, something kind of meta, something avant. There's a bunch of kind of experimental or kind of like quirky things you could do with that. There are a million different perspectives on it. But this film, and I could tell as soon as I watched it, it is trying to be the most rote, crowd-pleasing film within this premise, which that's not going to work.
No, exactly. And I think it was either the producer. No, yeah, the producer. One of the producers of this movie was one of the makers of the Unfriended series, which even though I don't think those are good movies, even though I don't think those are like great movies, but the premise of that actually works somewhat with the premise of it being like, yeah, like Zoom and like Facebook Messenger, like live cam stuff. Like it does something with that concept that this movie fails to do miserably.
Sense.
It does.
Unfriended, which I don't like, makes sense, and it justifies that webcam concept.
Yeah, but this objectively does not. This is very bad. And, it's one of those things, too, where it's a massive product placement for Amazon, just objectively speaking.
Yeah.
There is the climax of the film.
H.G. Wells would have been a huge fan of Amazon. He would have loved Amazon.
Exactly. But, like, literally the climax of the film is Ice Cube's future, well, soon-to-be son-in-law, I should say, is a Amazon delivery driver, and the climax is no joke. Ice Cube ordering a thumb drive off of Amazon and him piloting an Amazon Air to get shipped to him at the Pentagon or the DHS headquarters or whatever the fuck.
This is hell. This is fucking hell that we live in. It makes me... I hate it.
Amazon literally saves the world in this movie.
Of course. What else would I expect? So the thing that really bothered me about this movie, well, just a few minutes in, I was like, oh, this is bad. There is no reason to have a bad screenplay for a War of the Worlds adaptation. Now, if you want to say, like, other things about it don't work, and, there's lots of variables to making a movie, obviously, the script is bad. Inexcusable. Because, of course, you're working off the H.G. Wells source material. It's a great, pretty universal story. It's an alien invasion story that's going to transplant to pretty much any time and place if you keep the romance elements. But more importantly than that, you have the Orson Welles radio play. Any War of the Worlds adaptation forever could that radio play as its script. And it would at least have a very solid script. So, like,
absolutely,
why reinvent the wheel? There have been so many adaptations of War of the Worlds, and certainly this isn't the first bad adaptation of War of the Worlds. But, like, why try and reinvent the wheel? Why not take these tried and true elements? You've got the H.G. Wells book, you have the Orson Welles radio play, you have the 50s kind of like drive-in movie, like Technicolor adaptation. You have all these things. All you need to do is take this classic alien invasion story and transplant it into, like, the 2010s. Simple enough.
Exactly. I totally fucking agree. And, talk about bad War of the Worlds adaptations, right? Like, of course, there's the Tom Cruise movie, which isn't a great movie really at all. But that movie... But
it's at least a cinematic experience.
Exactly. Like, that movie is an epic movie. This is not an epic movie. This is a fail movie. This is honestly no joke.
It's War of the Worlds.
And you said you only watched about 10 minutes of it. I can tell you what, Brian.
Yeah.
The CG in this movie is literally some of the worst CG I have ever seen. I'm not even joking. There is
inexcusable.
You know what the CG quality is, Brian? The CG quality is the same quality as, you know that song Numa Numa? The actual official music video for that song has the same level of CG as
Yeah.
this. A 20-year-old song made in Moldova has better CG for its music video than this fucking movie.
What's wrong with this picture? This is not a small, zero-budget movie. Ice Cube is in it. It was promoted by Amazon. They didn't have to spend a bunch of the budget on effects or on sets or on props because it's all filmed on webcams. They couldn't invest some money in some, like, CG or in some fucking cool effects at all. Where did all that money go? Is this a money laundering project?
It has to be. It fucking has to be. I mean, the director is, like, Russian, Kazakh, like some Central Asia, like Eastern Europe guy, so I wouldn't be surprised. Once again, he's the same guy that produced, he's the same guy that once again either produced or directed the Unfriended movies, which also seem like money laundering operations, but either way, whatever.
But they at least work as films. They seem like finished films, right? Which this did not to me when I watched it.
No, 100%. But speaking of cinematic crimes, Brian, let's get back into some real motherfucking crime talk with some little dick fucking fucker fuck piece of shit villains.
These fucking true crime criminals, they're so lucky they aren't fucking in the room with us, Taylor. Because I know you, and you know me. We'd be fucking these little pervert degenerates, these people that hurt kids and women. I'd fucking give this guy a piece of my mind.
No, exactly. But either way, so yes, once again, our topic is going to be true crime. Now, obviously, true crime as a historical artifact has existed for really time immemorial. You know what I mean? We could probably find not articles, but historical artifacts from thousands of years ago that are essentially proto-true crime. You know what I mean? Like, even talking about things like the assassination of Julius Caesar was like a quasi-true crime moment, if you think about it.
Yeah. And it's sort of like a gradual escalation. Like, of course, there's always been fascination with crime, with true crime, in the literal sense, true crime events. But in the last, like, let's say 60 or 70 years even, you see kind of this, slowly you see it kind of congeal into a genre, right? Because if you look into like the 50s and 60s, you start getting like these kind of journalistic novels, right? In the 60s and 70s, you get things like the Valachi Papers or Helter Skelter, which sort of have an air of like academia. They're not that good, but they have an air at least of academia, of journalism, and of like kind of literary pretense to them, right?
Yes, exactly. So there's that level where it's, once again, salacious to a certain extent, but it's maybe more educational to a certain extent. But, nowadays, obviously.
Or it at least presents itself as such.
Or yes, exactly, as it presents itself. Whereas nowadays, once again, as the title of our show, the Millennials Are Old podcast, right? Like, millennials really made true crime into this empire of just exploitation.
Yeah.
Disguised as entertainment, for lack of a better word. And, once again, there are some creators and channels and, whatever that create interesting content with that. Exactly. Like some of the people who do a lot of or I should say, voice over the interrogation stuff or the body cam stuff where there is some interesting, conversation or academic research with it. But then there's some channels, once again, as we were alluding to with the E1 parody that we were doing, which was already a parody in itself, where the fucking fucker fucks type guys, like the pioneers of that in the modern context would be things like the last podcast on the left, which those guys are good at what they do, but the people who knocked them off are like unlistenable garbage. Like straight up.
So I don't listen to LP all that much these days. I've listened to quite a bit of it in the past. It's, it's just a good popular podcast. I think they and some other people, they do really well at towing the line. They do try to be like, we're mocking either the absurdity of the crimes or we are like trying to mock these criminals because they're like losers. And they don't always succeed. They try, I think, to treat the victims and the actual acts that are perpetrated with a sense of like, I wouldn't say they always succeed, but it's an attempt is made. But with the best people that do this, that's true. And it's probably the healthiest way to do true crime because the predecessor to like the LPN podcast and shit like that would be, Taylor, what you and I would have grown up with, which is weekly news special programs like Dateline or 2020, which they're more forward on the like, this is journalism aspect, but they're really not. They're just salacious stories. 48 Hours Investigates and shit like that. That would probably be the first thing, Taylor, I think, speaking for myself, that I would have seen that I would now recognize as true crime. And that really
100%.
is putting itself in your face as like news, which it's not.
No, it's not. It's once again essentially exploitation. It's one of those things where legitimate news sources will claim that we're just doing journalism when all you're really doing is just putting a very nice face on exploitation. And as we've always said, we like exploitation. We're not haters of exploitation necessarily.
Well, I think some of the most upfront about it.
No, exactly. Like, I think some of the most interesting developments in, like, art and culture the last 50, 60 years have come from exploitation. But, yeah, you just have to be fucking honest about it.
Because it mines such, like, subversive and transgressive things. Whether it's doing it for cynical reasons or not, when we talk about exploitation in art, it sucks. But that is how you see things you often won't see anywhere else. And that probably is true with, like, the early true crime thing. When you see the way it's degenerated, though, because, in that middle period, you've got the podcast boom. And some of that's god-awful. But you can even see the genre became so big that elements of it have kind of permeated into different spaces. I think a lot of the popular, leftist podcasts right now, and I'm sure neither of these shows would like being called this, Robert Evans with Behind the Bastard and, TrueAnon are both basically true crime shows a lot of the time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like when Robert Evans isn't like just simply talking about like a dictator who killed millions, but they're talking about like an individual piece of shit. That's essentially
Yeah.
true crime on Robert Evans. And, True Anon is, was ostensibly originally based on Epstein, which is a true crime thing, essentially. That's what the
Yeah.
fuck it is. But, I
And
wouldn't be
it's like
surprised if
more
Epstein killed some
ideological,
individuals.
or the
Yeah.
ideology is like more front loaded in both those cases, I guess.
No, exactly. And in the same way that, true crime, as we keep talking about in its best and worst case scenarios, a lot of true crime in some of its worst case scenarios, oddly enough, is just more like, I guess, ambiently apolitical, which in America's case means it's essentially right wing. That's essentially what it
Yeah.
means. It's like these sick fuckers deserve the chair and blah, 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 and essentially reinforcing our very broken criminal justice system in a way that, once again, not only exploits victims, but I think also is too punitive, I guess, to a certain extent, because it's basically saying, like, well, this guy was fucking weird. He killed people. You need to be afraid. It's just a reactionary, like, fear mongering to a lot of these things. And then on top of it, too, some of the worst ones, too, like, there was that, I can't remember what that podcast was called, but there was, like, a drama thing with, like, a true crime podcast that essentially, like, devolved into petty drama. And I remember the, like, image that they use in their Spotify, which is literally, like, a man and a woman, like, soy facing, and it's, like, called My Favorite Murderer or something. And I'm like,
My
what
favorite
is
murder.
this?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm like, what
I
is
don't.
this?
So true crime. I've been thinking about this since you told me that this was going to be our first general topic. Like I said, we've both consumed a good amount of true crime, so I think we've both consumed a lot of the good material. And so I was kind of going through what I've encountered, throughout my life in that kind of broad genre, and I think you see it break down into a few different. The audience is so big, but there are true crime fans that see themselves a few different ways, right? So probably the biggest one is like your casual person who has like a morbid curiosity. And that's like everyone here, but you've got the person that gets themselves scared. You ever meet like a middle-aged lady who listens to a lot of true crime and she convinces herself that she's like keeping herself aware and she's like terrifying herself?
Yes. You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of when people would like doom watching the news or whatever. It's very similar to that. Like they think they're
Yeah,
doing
yeah, no.
activism or doom scrolling, but they're really just pissing themselves off.
So I've said probably every episode now, I work in downtown Portland. And a few years ago, it was, there's a lot going on in any big city. It's just the economics of it are rough. My boss was this lady who listened to a lot of true crime podcasts. And we would talk about like podcasts we listened to together. Or like, do you see this, fucked up thing on the news? It gave me something in common with her to like small talk about, right? And she would make herself so stressed out because she would listen to true crime all day, all night, sit in her office listening to the goriest true crime stories. And I'd say, hey, you all right? Like maybe you should take a break. And she would go, no, it's good that I'm listening to all this because it keeps me aware of what happens in the world if I let my guard down. And then she'd be constantly terrified of every fucking homeless person outside. She'd be locking the door every 5 seconds. I'd be like, man, you gotta chill. So that's, I think, one part of the fan base. Your other part of the fan base is, as we've alluded to, you're reactionary, right? This is related to the person that feeds off their own fear, but it's a little more distinct. They listen to it and they get themselves gassed up and they think, oh, this person's such a piece of shit. The vigilante, the would-be vigilante who's like inserts them into the story and thinks about how this person deserves to be murdered. And they love to hear all the horrible suffering of the victim so they can vicariously like get angry about it and imagine punishing all the criminals. I think that's another significant part of the audience for true crime.
No, absolutely, yeah. Like, and there's definitely, I would say, some of the more academic side. Like, I would imagine, like people who study psychology or even sociology would listen and watch true crime just to understand, I guess, the socio-cultural reasons why some of these things happen. But let's be honest here, most of the people who listen to it probably don't think that deeply about it. I think you and I are pretty much some of the only people that think that deeply about it, or people like us, I should say, to be honest with you.
So I think there's 4 distinct categories I've sort of broken down in my thinking about this the last week or so. Those are the 3. There's another one which I think is the worst, and this is like the My Favorite Murder people. I've never listened to that show, so I don't want to talk too much shit about them because I might be like throwing them under the bus more than they deserve. I don't know. But it's the person that's just completely like, oh, this is a real creepy story, gang, and it's like, oh, and you won't believe what happens next. And it's salacious, and it's talking about real life murders like it's like a spooky horror story, like it's like Tales from the Crypt or something. Now, my honest opinion, though, Taylor, is that most people that consume true crime content, including probably you and I, are some combination of these 4 people, right? to some
Yeah,
degree.
no, absolutely. I would say I'm probably least like the whole like this fucking sick fuck. I can't wait to like
Yeah, me too.
meet him in prison. And I would say I'm the least like that. But I would say the other three, it's a pretty strong mix of all three of those. I would say.
Well, like my guess, if I put on my armchair psychologist like hat for a second, is we all have some combination of those because as we've said, like that reactionary strand that we're talking about, that's like the ambient radiation of American culture, right? So there are probably moments, maybe it's not when I'm listening to the same podcast as they do. Maybe it's when I'm listening to one about like, I don't know, like if I'm listening to the podcast like Weird Little Guys when they talk about like these like horrible fascists or something. I probably get that same impulse there, right? Which isn't exactly the same, but it's related. What's weird about it, I think, is that so this was a steady, popular kind of genre, but it blew the fuck up, right? In what, the early 2010s to the mid 2010s?
Yeah, I would say really with the proliferation of like DIY like video culture online, I would say.
And what do you think the correlation is there? What do you think it is about that moment in time that makes this, for decades, reliable genre suddenly become like institution, you know?
I think it's one of those things where it's basically like a lot of online video content that was kind of ambiently existent but became really big and, smaller creators doing it. Is I think it was just essentially the opening of new media at the end of the day. It's one of those things where, like, for example, like video game reviews were a thing that were on TV or were online publications or whatever for years and years. And then people like, AVGN came out, and then basically all the people that were inspired by AVGN to make content. And now reviewing and talking about video games online is one of the most trite things you could fucking
Like the
do.
default. That's an interesting point. True crime and video game content, they're both things that almost everyone in this country has some level of interest in, right? So when that platform or those platforms online become democratized, almost anyone can do a little bit of research and log on and say, I have opinions about this, or I heard about this crazy case. It's not so specialized as like if you wanted to make a video about like Shakespeare, you'd have to actually know something about Shakespeare. You couldn't just watch a few videos and, do some Googles or some Wikipedia reading and be like, ready to make my video. With true crime and with video games, with all these things that popped off online, you kind of can. Like, we all can be engaged in that conversation because it's so in the background of everything we've consumed our whole lives.
Exactly, yeah. And, with true crime, especially some of the more severe cases, like, for example, like I said, serial killers or, serial rapists or like child murderers or whatever the fuck, right? Like, it's something that is just so ubiquitously evil that it's something that anybody can theoretically like jump on the bandwagon and be like, I disagree with this, essentially. So when people make a video being like, look at this piece of shit, or I'm going to analyze this piece of shit, or you know what I mean? Like, people are like,
it's not going to be real divisive.
No, yeah, like nobody's gonna look at, for example, who is the guy that killed his family in Disneyland or that Disneyland fucking Disney World town?
Tony Tote.
Yeah, no one's gonna look at Tony Tote and be like, I think that guy had a motherfucking point. They're just gonna watch him and be like, look at this freak. Like, really?
So that is one of my, so again, say I'm not above the true crime. That is one of my personal favorite cases because that guy's such a fucking loser and he's so fucking smug and it makes me so happy. Now I'm doing it. That he is constantly giving his testimony and going, I'm the smartest person in the world. It's like, no, you fucking killed your family because you're a bankrupt scam artist loser. Sorry, that's...
No, it's all good. And that's the thing, though, is that even though we're talking about the good and bad of true crime, like, we understand its appeal. Like, we're not necessarily like, we're so above this. We're not fucking Michelle Haneke and Funny Games bullshit going on. Like, we're not saying we're above this shit, you know what I mean? While engaging with it at the same time, which we will talk about Funny Games sometime and why I fucking hate that movie, but that's not here or there.
So,
but either way,
that'll be a good episode because I love Funny Games. But I hate him now because I watched another movie by him and it was equally as like preachy and as violent. And then I thought, like, maybe this guy's just kind of a pervert. Seeing another movie by him made me rethink my perception of Funny Games, which I had previously loved.
Well, and that's the thing, though, Brian. It's once again, doth protest too much, right? Like everybody being like, "Oh, well, this thing that you like, it's really bad," and then them doing it, it's like, and then you keep talking about how bad it is.
You're the one that made the fucking movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm just the one who watched the movie. You're the one that made a movie about a whole family being murdered. Interesting. Brian, did you know that a lot of killers like to very much creatively engage in the things that they're going to do? Interesting. I'm not saying Michelle Haneke is going to murder somebody, but I'm going to say Michelle Haneke would be more likely to murder somebody somebody than me. I'll just say that. I'm just gonna be real. He's also Austrian, so automatically he's more likely gonna
Well,
kill
yeah,
somebody.
that's already a side eye there. One of the things, talking again about the degeneration of true crime from, the pretense of journalism and academia and these bestsellers that were pretty well regarded, if a bit salacious, to like your news specials, to your podcasts, is that we're now, and I think you're seeing this blow up. Well, we talked about your JCSs and your Dreadings and your popular YouTube channels that do interview footage, and they do, the better of them, they do some psychology, they do some analysis, they're in some way transformative. That's actually pretty interesting content when it's done well, but I think we're now to a point where it really pops off, and get them recommended to me all the time, are straight up body cam footage of police body cam footage that is only remarkable for the level of like discomfort that you see the people they apprehended and the level of like humiliation they go through, right? That is like the ultimate, like what true crime has become now. It's like you're shooting it right into your veins. I just want to see the fucking direct body cam footage of this person, this alleged perpetrator, being humiliated by the cops, and maybe someone will do a voiceover and call them fat or call them a Walmartian or something.
Well, what's interesting, too, on top of it, talk about the true crime aspect of that. Originally, body cams were a criminal justice reform, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was the idea that we're going to try to keep these cops accountable, which, of course, that didn't really do anything. But at the end of the day, it still exists. But nowadays, it's used as a way to content farm for a lot of content creators. It doesn't keep cops honest, obviously, and now people are using it to make content out of, essentially, just by ripping
had the
raw
same
footage.
thought. When I was kind of grappling with this, it's kind of like you have this modest reform, or at least attempt at reform. This is kind of like, and you have heard cops complain about their body cams. We've all heard that. We've all seen footage of them whining. We all remember them complaining about their body cams in the George Floyd protest and how they don't always catch anything. Don't ask me how the body cam might miss something if it's always on. But this is almost like ambient reactionary radiation of the culture. It's almost like it's grabbed the body cam footage and no, we're going to make it even more reactionary. We're going to slant it even more. We're going to have some shithead AI voice in a YouTube call like an alleged person who's being apprehended and maybe thrown to the ground and crying, which is a lot of what you see. It's like, look at this dumb asshole who tried to steal from Walmart. This person who's probably like starving or probably badly in need of hygiene, stuff like that. Sometimes someone that's like stealing a toothbrush or stealing deodorant, and the cops are like, don't run, and they like throw him down to the ground, and then the camera's like, that's what you get for breaking the law. Like, these are such popular videos. We've now stripped away any pretense of academia, any pretense of journalism. This is literally just like, I want to see the crime and punishment, and I want to see just the awful feelings that go through that process.
No, exactly.
But
and
that's
a lot
true
of those
crime.
No, it is. And a lot of those are really hard to watch. Although I will be honest, seeing Shakira flabbergasted get arrested 20 times is pretty funny. I'm not going to lie.
I haven't watched the new one yet. I'm waiting for the Dreading video about it. I can't watch a whole video of her voice. I really can't. The thing with Dreading is that I can't make fun of Shakira because I'm not that funny and I'm not that knowledgeable about law. But also, like, she's so annoying. She just makes me mad, right? But with Dreading, he gives you little breaks and he says cute little things. You know what I mean?
No, exactly. And, it's one of those things, even though it takes place in Wisconsin, Brian, you can't even be mad at the Wisconsin accent because she doesn't have a Wisconsin accent. She's from the East Coast.
Oh, what? Yeah, she's from fucking Boston. Is that right?
Yeah, she's a fucking masshole in Wisconsin. Probably the worst person to ever exist. The worst type of person to ever exist. Like, imagine that level of entitlement and that shitty East Coast attitude living in central Wisconsin. Oh, my God.
It's just like, I mean, obviously, we've talked about this privately, because, again, we watch these fucking, we watch all the videos of this chick having around. She's clearly has some sort of a problem that, like, needs to be addressed, right? But it's like, how do you even get that bad? How do you go through life and you get a boyfriend and you have a child and, she's had jobs, presumably she has some sort of an education, at least a high school education. How do you get to her age and just respond to everything that way? I've met some pretty fucked up and obnoxious people, but I just can't imagine. At some point you would think, see, we're going on a bit of a tangent, but see, this is what the body cam footage, this is what True Crime Brain does. It makes you watch this shitty footage and go, I'm a genius psychologist. Let me do a little analyzing here.
Yeah, let me do a little, shoe leather, backseat driver, Facebook University diagnosis here.
Exactly. But that's what it gives to you. That's what all of it gives you. even the best of it, even the LPN guys, which again, I like that podcast. I've listened to a lot of it. I think they're pretty funny. I think they're pretty respectful. I think they're pretty informative. But it all gives you the sense of like, you get to feel close to these heinous things that most of us, God willing, will never have to experience. And it makes you feel like an expert about it. And that brings me to another specific type of true crime person. Now, I talked about the four broad swaths of it, but I think I've recognized in your aficionados, in your real true crime fanatics, a couple of different strands. And this is one that I've encountered myself, because I was actually on a Last Podcast on the Left Facebook group for a while, just to see people's posts and, to like comment on things once in a while, People who feel like they're fucking detectives. They have a million opinions about every infamous true crime case, and if you make a comment about a case and you don't know all of the minutia that they know, they will be like, actually, and they'll kind of like talk down to you online about it because you haven't listened to a million fucking hours of fucking JonBenet Ramsey podcasts. Like, they're like, I'm actually like basically a detective because I listen to so many podcasts. That is a very specific type of online true crime super fan. The other person, the other super fan, Taylor, I think you know where I'm going, is the person who just openly loves, they're into like the gore of it, right? Like their interest in true crime has come down to just knowing everything about the mechanisms of torture, the mechanisms of decay. But because they learn about it from true crime, which is journalistic, they've convinced themselves that it's not because they're weirdos.
Yes. And, even though we're talking about like true crime, I guess, well, once again, true crime aficionados and people who view it from a, parasocial lens. But, I think we'll get into very shortly, too, the true crime, like, collectors, if you will, like the people who own, like, and this is the most extreme cases. Yeah, exactly. Like the people who own, like, serial killer memorabilia and stuff like that. I mean, those are, like, the more extreme end of, like, true crime aficionados. But, like, those people definitely exist, too. And we've alluded to that a little bit on earlier episodes of the podcast, kind of tangentially. But like some people that we really look up to are like serial killer memorabilia people. Like, Jonathan Davis from Korn was a pretty infamous serial killer memorabilia guy for a while.
I think Murrow was one of the first big true crime aficionados, like somewhat famous ones.
Yeah, I remember there was a documentary that talked about like serial killer memorabilia, and Merle Allen was in there, JD, and the guy, and I think they covered him on BTB, but the guy who like went to the local, I don't know, whatever police department that Albert Fish like murdered people in or whatever, and he like switched out the letter that Albert Fish sent to the like girl's family, and he somehow like tricked the person who's running the records department to like give him the actual letter.
I don't know this story. That's crazy, man. That's psycho. Okay, I'm of two minds about the serial killer collectible thing. First of all, in the abstract, sometimes I think, because I'm a little bit of an edgelord, we've talked about that on the show, it's a part of me. I think, like, I would probably own some cool, crazy serial killer shit. When I think about it in the abstract, I feel that way. When I think about the specifics of it, and I think about how every time I would have to see this thing and hold it or show it to someone, I might think about the actual specific crime, I suddenly can't. Like, I think right now where I don't own anything like that, I feel like, oh, that might be kind of funny and cool and fucked up to have. But I think if I actually owned something by one of those people, it would make me feel very dirty and very depressed.
No, I totally agree. And that's why it's one of those things where I would look very poorly on pretty much anybody who would ever collect serial killer memorabilia. Because, like, even though it's, I guess, an interesting piece if you're in an audience for that. But yeah, owning, for example, and, that was the guy who I was talking about who owned the, like, infamous Albert Fish letter to Grace Budd's mom, a guy named Joe Coleman, who's just a fucking weird guy altogether. And yeah, I remember watching a documentary where he talks about, tricking this, I don't know, evidence department or newspaper or whatever the fuck to like trick them into giving him the actual letter. And I'm like, that's really impressive, dude. I'm proud of you. That's something you should really
very cool. Well, and why do you need that? That's the other thing with the serial killer art is like, because, and I've said, like, in theory, in the abstract, I can see, like, oh, I see the having this cool fucked up thing. But, like, when you really think about it, like, why do you need it? Now, I'm not going to sit and, like, judge, like, whatever. I'm sure that there are people who have some serial killer art that are lovely people. I'm sure those people exist. There's probably much more of them than there are of, like the Nickelodeon pedophile who owned a painting by John Gacy and exchanged letters with him. Real thing, by the way.
Yeah, God.
But just like, why do you need that? Why do you need to feel? Because okay, so for instance, the letter that Fish wrote to that girl's family, or a painting by Gacy, those aren't just like collectibles. Those are pretty intimate items, right?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, the letter itself is like literally like evidence. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's not something that's like, oh, this guy made this weird thing when he was a child and he later ended up being a murderer. Like, whatever. But like the letter, especially, that was a thing that he used to brag about murdering and cannibalizing a child. That would be like, for example, somebody collecting, I don't know how you could necessarily collect this, but you know what I mean? Like collecting the original like audio files of like the Golden State Killer taunting his like rape and murder victims. Like, why do you need to own that? Like, what exactly is it like? Hey, I own this thing that this monster did to these fucking people.
Well, because when we break it down on the most literal way, Taylor, you and I are both collectors of things. You collect like cool and out of print like films and DVDs. I have pretty extensive like personal library of books. And part of the appeal for myself is I found this thing, it fits into my specific taste. I read it, I consumed it, and now it's part of my broader collection. And I can look at it almost like a trophy of like these are all these cool things that mean something to me. And they all fit together and they kind of reflect the tapestry that is Brian. And I think on some level, in the most pretentious and like emotional ways, that's probably how you would feel when you look at like the cool out of print DVDs you have and things, and there are all these weird films and there are all these films that you like a lot. It's go, oh, these are all these things that I care about preserving. It's about you caring about the thing you're collecting and seeing yourself in some small way as a historian of it. And these people, they want to be that way about artifacts of like the most evil acts of all time. And it's like, why? What do you get out of that?
Yeah, exactly. Or like, and obviously serial killer memorabilia and this have quite a lot of overlap, although I'm not saying they're necessarily the same thing, but it's the same people that collect like fucking like Nazi memorabilia. Do you really need to own
It's
like
definitely
a
the same.
actual like German swastika thing? Yeah, no, and to be fair, I'm not saying that all serial killer memorabilia people are Nazis, but there is definitely a cross section. The Venn diagram is fairly similar. I'll just say that.
I would argue, I'm not saying that it's good to own either. You could make more of an argument that there's a reason to collect Nazi memorabilia as part of like this unique and like unforgettable and like worth preserving and remembering. You could argue that because of its historical relevance, there is more reason to preserve those items. Serial killers, an individual serial killer does not have historical relevance. There is no relevance to John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy. They're just losers that fucking killed a bunch of people who didn't deserve it, right? That's what Hitler is too, but his actions and his movement were on such a scale that it's like helped shape our world.
No, exactly. And there is a, socio-cultural thing with a lot of those like more infamous serial killers, like you said, Ted Bundy and John Wayne Gacy, that they existed in this very much cultural zeitgeist of people being able to essentially get away with murder for a long time without being caught. Although I think for a lot of that, I have the theory for serial killers becoming more, I guess, prevalent in the 70s and 80s is just that I think those types of people existed for decades and centuries, even millennia before then, but it's just now that police work actually got slightly more competent at that point to be able to catch these people.
Yeah, it was
So,
a brief window of time where police work was advanced enough to recognize the patterns of a single person committing a string of murders, but not advanced enough to catch them using like DNA evidence.
exactly. So that's why I think there was so much of a quote unquote surge of serial killers in the 70s and 80s that it was finally putting the light on these fucking people, finally. That it existed kind of in the shadows for like, yeah, decades and centuries and even millennia before then, I think.
That absolutely makes sense. Obviously, there are still serial killers out there. It's not that they disappeared or they're only existing that time. You're probably gonna see less serial killers now because most of them are probably getting caught earlier, just right because of advancements in DNA testing and things like that, right?
Well, and also it's one of those things where I think a lot of them just become mass shooters now, to be honest.
Yeah, straight up. I didn't even think of that. That is an excellent point.
Like somebody like Nicholas Cruz or, Brenton Tarrant, the guy who shot up the New Zealand mosques. That guy just would have been a serial killer probably in the past, to be honest with you.
But he had access to a weapon that allowed him to annihilate a much wider number of people with way less effort.
Exactly. And also in a much obviously abridged time period than what a serial killer could do. So, but yeah, no, like true crime content, as we keep talking about, is very fascinating because it's so multifaceted. It goes, yeah, from all the way to, serial killers to, child predators and, rapists and stuff like that. And even talk about some of the lower stakes things, like, yeah, people getting arrested at Walmart with, fucking body cam footage or whatever. Like, it's so all encompassing. And in some ways, it's a way that it can be used to instruct, psychologically for example. And, another true crime content that is more, biographically based is the Netflix series that I'm really hoping comes back, but the, Mindhunter TV show, if you ever watched that, the David Fincher series.
I haven't, but I've heard it's good. I have
It's
heard
really
good
fucking
things.
good. But like those guys are like the OG academic like investigators. I mean, they literally were in the FBI, but they were the first guys in the FBI, especially I think Wrestler, and I can't remember what the other guy's name was, but those guys were like the first people to be like, these guys are like weird, right? But like maybe we should find out like why they're weird. And the FBI were like, whoa, buddy, whoa, what the fuck? That's crazy. It was literally like these guys were like, hey, there's like these fetishes and stuff these people kill because of it. Wouldn't it be interesting if we like learned why? And they're like, whoa, 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 we literally just found out what sex is, okay? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because that show's really interesting because, and even though it's dramatized, obviously, to a significant extent, but at the same time, it's interesting watching like the old FBI's opinions on like crime, and they're just like, yeah, these guys kill because they're fucking weird, nothing to it. It's bizarre.
They're fucking born evil. They're bad seeds.
I mean, J. Edgar Hoover was like dressed up in his like mom's clothes and being like, "What the fuck are you talking about? I'm just about to have sex with men, and you want to find out why these guys kill people?"
Well, let's be real. J. Edgar Hoover absolutely was a bad seed, but it's not because he was like a tranny or whatever.
Yeah, no. Just to be very clear, I'm just more making fun of the fact that he was like a bad person, but also was somebody who had what at the time would have been considered very degenerate sexual attitudes. But he's like, oh, but these people are the weird ones. Let's catch them first, while he's like sucking off a guy in a bathroom dressed up as a woman.
So that's a good example of like more respectable true crime show. A true crime show that I really enjoyed when I was younger. Taylor, did you ever watch American Gangster on BET?
I did not. I was not really a BET watcher, as you can imagine. I have really only within the last few years even remotely liked rap and hip hop as a genre. So I'm like, I was not into that. I will say the one thing though was always Def Jam Fight for New York, which is still a classic video game.
So American Gangster, every episode was about an hour long, and it was about like an infamous black gang leader or organizer. Tukey Williams, founder of the Crips. Leroy Nicky Barnes, the 1970s Detroit heroin kingpin, who was on the cover of, I believe, Time or People at the height of his power. It was just an open heroin kingpin. But they got a lot into like the sociology and things. There's also a fair bit, because that just sells, of like some glorification of them, or at least some kind of like muddled, like for instance, one of the things they talk about in the Leroy Nicky Barnes episode is how he was affiliated with the early Nation of Islam. He did a lot of black liberation things. He also sold heroin to black communities, right? He made himself incredibly wealthy off those communities. So pretty interesting discussions in that show. For the most part, pretty good job of getting into the psychology and sociology, a little bit of glorification kind of sprinkled in, but, I think that's actually to be expected with most things about organized crime and gangsters. They did a really good episode about Freeway Ricky Ross, the drug dealer who, if was kind of a pawn of the CIA and Reagan in the Iran-Contra scandal. He was like the guy that they were funneling crack to.
He also later became a morbidly obese rapper, correct?
Yes, same guy.
The exact same guy.
Yeah, you can tell he quit doing crack because he gained a bunch of weight.
Yeah, but no, you're right. And once again, we keep talking about true crime. Like, we want to be very clear. There is a wide spectrum from the like amygdala, like just very little thought process true crime to the stuff that is very academic. And I would say my ultimate thought to the audience at home on this subject is just try to remember the entertainment that you watch has a certain viewpoint, and try to make sure that you're, I guess, on the right side of that viewpoint, or stuff that at the very least doesn't engage in some of the more negative aspects of some of your thought process, like the more reactionary elements. At least I would say, unless you're a Nazi watching our TV show, then definitely watch more of that. It's very good for your mental health.
And, we all fall into the thing, we consume some shitty media. I've caught myself falling down the rabbit hole of sometimes watching, like, falling for a clickbait title and watching the fucking body cam footage. I think, it's all around us. If you're going to consume that type of material now and again, if you fall into that, first of all, I would say don't make it a habit, just like with junk food. But also, when you are consuming it, don't forget what it is. Keep a healthy distance between yourself and remember what you're watching. If you are going to consume true crime material, what I would say as a general rule, and I think this is where a lot of stuff that got really popular, a lot of the really old millennial stuff, right, is Taylor and I like all kinds of fucked up stuff. We've done film reviews mostly about kind of depraved trash, like by and large, right? But there's a reason that most of what we do isn't documentary, and most of it's pretty steadily fictional, right? If you're consuming true crime, which again, true is the operative word in there. Operative word in that genre is not crime, and it's true. That's the part that you are getting titillation from, the knowledge that things really happened. Remember that like there are things that happened after the salacious detail. There are feelings that those families were left to live with. There are after effects, the ramifications within the legal system that are still affecting people today. Not to be too preachy, but if you're going to consume that material, I would say again, try to seek out something that we gave a few examples. Something like Mindhunter, American Gangster. Last Podcast on the Left is probably the best example because they're so popular. That, has an element of history, has an element of context, while being entertaining. But just kind of think about the people in this story and how they must have felt as these events happened. Not as an abstract, like, scary story. Because I think the thing with true crime is a lot of people consume it like it's a horror movie. And again, I don't want to be preachy. I think that's a pretty deeply antisocial behavior, especially if you're doing it a lot.
Exactly. Don't be like the My Favorite Murder true crime convention fucking freaks like that. Like, these are essentially real people who experience real tragedy. And you can consume, not necessarily consume, but you can, well, obviously consume, but you know what I mean? Like, you can watch that content and engage with it in ways that still contextualize what happened and can be entertainment, but also remembering the humanity of people who suffered under these individual incidences that happened.
Yeah, to that end, Taylor, I do feel the need to ask you a very serious question. Who is your favorite serial killer? You have to pick one right now. Who is it?
I would say for the most off the wall, balls to the wall, I'm going to say Richard Chase. That guy was fucking weird.
Richard Chase, that guy is fucking weird. Yeah, that's mine. Axeman of New Orleans.
Ooh, that's a good choice,
one of the OGs.
Too.
Okay, here's the thing. If I got one of the Axeman letters, I think, would I keep it? If I somehow had the money, an Axeman letter where he said that all of the houses in New Orleans had to leave their doors open and play jazz music to keep safe from him, would I keep it? I don't think I would.
I don't think I would. If I had one of Richard Chase's blenders, I would not keep that. I'm going to be honest.
But that's actually a really... So the thing with the Axeman, and I'm making excuses for myself, is it's so far away and it's, kind of like almost pre-modern at this point, 1920s.
Well, and also the guy was never caught either.
It feels a little more mythic, right? I know that's stupid. That's not true. It's not mythic. It's real. I'm contradicting everything I just said because I'm saying that for myself, not just for you, the listener,
Same thing with Jack the Ripper stuff. That's been made incredibly mythic at that point, but like 5+ real women were horrifically brutally murdered and mutilated.
No one gave a shit because of their occupation, because of their social status.
Exactly. And even the quote-unquote investigation that happened afterwards was so rife with like misconduct that they were never going to get caught. Even though the guy did it pretty obviously, like if that guy did that nowadays, he would have gotten caught almost immediately.
Oh, yeah. It was so brazen. Well, have you heard the fucking conspiracy theory that was the prince? It was Jack the Ripper?
Yeah, wasn't that talked about in Alan Moore From Hell?
Yeah.
That's what I thought,
And From Hell, they talk about that, yeah. From Hell is a pretty good graphic novel. Alan Moore is great.
I've heard the movie's really bad, though. I've not seen the movie.
I've not seen the movie, but the graphic novel is quite good.
Well, speaking of graphic things, Brian, I think we've been talking for about an hour now. Do we have any final thoughts before we get to our pluggables on true crime?
I think we pretty much said it. There's all kinds of true crime media to consume, and we all end up eating out of the trough sometimes with all kinds of content. It's fine. Keep aware of what you're watching, what you're reading. Just have some context of like the viewpoint and the agenda it puts forward in society. Try to seek out the good stuff, not necessarily the most academic stuff, not necessarily the most solemn stuff. Try to seek out something that, tries to address the humanity of the victims, tries to get its facts right too. I know this is crime and it's all solved and most of them are in the past, but something with a little detail maybe. Something that I haven't listened to their show in years, but not to put them up too much on a fucking pedestal here. Something like LPN, or again, something like Mindhunter, which, probably has some tacky elements to it, but might give you something enriching, You might get something out of it beyond the salacious elements. Like, try to look for that. Try not to watch the body cam footage videos, and I say this again to myself, caught myself watching them, and sometimes I'm watching one for about an hour, and then I just realize I feel really depressed and gross, and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't be watching this.
No, exactly. I totally agree. Just like with almost anything we talk about, like even if you're watching like trash entertainment, just try to remember, and even though the trash entertainment part, once again, these are real people who experience real things. So yeah, try to seek out the humanity in it. Like, if you're watching Friday 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street movie, like, you don't really have to think too deeply about it because it's a fiction. Like, people have been murdered at camps, right? But it wasn't based off of actual people that died in a camp. You know what I mean? Like, it's completely fictionalized, whereas this is ostensibly supposed to be nonfiction. So yeah, definitely try to seek out the more, academic or more interesting or things that actually have like value to it, not brain rot entertainment, essentially. That's what I'm trying to say. Like the AI stuff especially, or body cam stuff, or just anything without any kind
AI
of
stuff.
Yeah, that's the ultimate lesson of all modern art is that do not, if it's AI, don't engage with it. The only AI thing I engage with is the gay country songs, and I'm just waiting for somebody to actually create the real gay country song.
For the next 6 months, when we are still able to discern the difference between human-made art and AI art, don't engage with AI art. 6 months from now, all bets are off. We won't even be able to tell.
Until the singularity catches up to us.
In about 4 weeks.
But speaking of singularity, Brian, I think that ends our episode on true crime. So let's get into our pluggables here. So as always, you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, you can please subscribe and follow us. And please, I should say, subscribe and follow us on both our YouTube and our Spotify channels, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, Robert are creating a fantastic series. I believe at this point, they are, I think, around a third of their funding at this point. They're doing pretty good in their funding, but of course they need more of our moral and financial support to continue to get their series off the ground. At this point, they're in pre-production. We haven't recorded an episode in a few weeks now. Brian, has there been any updates on that?
So they are rolling along. They are heading hot into the production schedule. So they're still aiming for their fall shooting period. That is set. That is happening. There's a lot in the oven here. They're getting a lot of their ducks in a row real fast. But they are set for that production date. That is happening. The time is booked. The location's set.
No, exactly. Like, they are very much on the up and up when it comes to the series. So yeah, please donate to the campaign. And as always, if you donate to the campaign, just send us an email, send us a YouTube comment, just give us any proof or indication that you donate to the podcast, and we will within reason match those donations. Because of course, we want Scott Sean Roberts' dreams to become a reality. And talk about true crime as well in the very salacious way. Our good boy Luigi, he's fighting the good fight. He's the person who has been accused in the United Healthcare CEO shooting. Of course, we don't believe that Luigi did it. We believe he's totally innocent of all charges. There's been no evidence brought to the forefront right now that would change that indication in our feelings or opinions at all. But, he is technically a true crime subject right now. So, the crowdfund has made well over $1 million, but he still needs our moral and possibly financial support to continue his way through the criminal justice system. If you want to donate to the fund, of course, just like with, Scott Sean Roberts' Lucifer and the Father campaign, show us that you donated and we will within reason match those donations, about $20-25. Same with Lucifer and the Father, because we believe in Luigi. He's a cool guy. And even if you don't have money, because at this point, like, we're probably a few months away from having our entire fucking economy collapse. That's what the jobs reports and everything is indicating at this point. Apparently there's been more layoffs like within the last few months than there's been since like the beginning of like COVID. So like we're gonna experience some fucking shit pretty goddamn soon. So if you don't want to donate, or you can't donate for whatever reason, totally fine. But just post about Luigi, talk about how cool he is, just keep his name in the zeitgeist, because he is, just like with everything going on in the current fucking administration right now, he is potentially going to be made an example of. So we need to stand by basically everybody at this fucking point who's being railroaded by this shitty ass criminal justice system.
Please. As we always say, if you don't have a lot of money to give, send him a short letter. He loves getting them. That's true.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things where it really doesn't take that much. In fact, it really takes pretty much nothing to have solidarity with people who are getting fucked over. It really takes nothing. In fact, sometimes it literally takes your silence.
It is literally the least we can do.
Exactly. So yeah, do not engage in propaganda, right-wing propaganda, fucking mainstream media propaganda about how Luigi, there's some doubts. And it's like, there's really no doubts. Luigi didn't do it.
And if there's people in your life that you think you could reach, when they start saying that bullshit, say, hey, it's not really like that. If there are people that are not worth your time and your energy to argue with, don't bother doing it. If your mom is kind of like maybe like a moderate lib and she's talking shit about Luigi, say like, hey, Ma, I don't know if it's like that, and tell her why. If it's like your your crazy right-wing uncle, don't bother. You don't have to waste that time on them. But, just be open to these conversations with people that you respect, who you think there might be a point in talking to about it. Because, again, this is about showing solidarity with someone who is being railroaded by, like, a far-right justice system who wants to make an example of him in their solidarity with a corporatist state. That is what this
100
is.
fucking percent. 100 fucking percent. And speaking of people who are getting railroaded by life, that leads perfectly to our Patreon, because at the current moment we don't have any patrons, but we do have a Patreon. We are releasing 2 to 4 episodes every month. We have several tiers, including the $5 tier, where you get every episode of the podcast 48 hours early. And just talking about true crime once again, the first 48 hours are the most important. That TV show taught us that. So please become a patron today so you can, of course, support our great show. Because, of course, we are giving content away for free. And, we're not going to lock any content away. We've always talked about how we're not going to do that. But we do want to give incentives to the people who are willing to donate to us, obviously.
You owe it to us.
Exactly. You are pay piggies who need to give us money right now. We will become findoms if we fucking have to. We don't want to, but we have to.
We're entering a bold new era. Millennials are old. The middlebrow cultural revolution has started. We are halfway through our 5-year plan. It is a great time to jump on board, to start giving us money. You're about to see things get crazy. Conversations are gonna get tense. Me and Taylor may separate and sever our romantic relationship. You don't know what's going to happen.
No, exactly. And speaking of things that are incredibly romantic and beautiful, Brian, do you have any pluggables as well?
Yeah, please follow us at the Facebook page Millennials Are Old on Facebook. That's mostly what I use to keep tabs. The Tom Laughlin pages. Boy, they fight a lot. It seems like for every 3 days, there's someone gets really mad, someone posts some pro-Trump stuff, and Tom's nephew gets pissed off, and then the whole group is just kind of dead for about 3 or 4 days, and then it starts right back up again. Otherwise, follow us at the Millennials Are Old pod on Threads and Instagram. That is the most reliable way to reach us if you want to harass me, if you want to berate me, if you don't agree with the show, if you want to be on the show, if you have a suggestion for a theme, if you hate us, if you have cringe generational content to send us. Please do not send me my own podcast and call it cringe millennial content. Please, I'm begging you. But yeah, Millennials Are Old pod, Instagram and Threads. You can also follow me at JLoBiafra, all one word, JLoBiafra, Instagram and Threads. That is the most direct way to reach me if you want to argue with me, if you want to harass me, if you want to promote all of my favorite tweets, if you want to try to push me into the sphere of influence. But particularly if you're going to do that on the Millennials Are Old pod account, because my coworkers follow me on my regular account and I don't need that blowing up.
No, exactly. And you're right, Brian. Nothing we do on this podcast is cringy. I mean, we're based as fuck, especially in comparison to some of the things that we've covered recently that are cringe, like fucking Brian Koberger and the Deep Thought boat fiasco and the Ice Cube War of the Worlds. We're way more based than those fucking things by a lot.
We truly are.
Straight up. But speaking of true crime, Brian, I think it's a fucking crime that I'm still awake because I'm an old-ass millennial who needs to put his fucking dumb ass to sleep. Would you agree with that, Brian?
I would say that is true crime.
All right, so have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight and don't be a victim of true crime or its propaganda, and engage in good shit as always. Even if things suck, engage in the things that suck that are also good, but also engage in good things too.
Or engage in things that suck in an educational and informative way. We're getting a little in our preachy bag this episode, and you might see a little more of that in the future, because we're taking on kind of like, I guess, in some way, bigger topics, right? If you're going to engage with the stuff that sucks, try to do it in a way that you can get something out of it, that you can pull something positive out of that, even just for yourself.
No, exactly. Very much advocate for yourself in engaging in good things. I think that's ultimately the lesson we can take away.
That is what, when we say the middlebrow cultural revolution, I think that's what we mean, right? The idea that art doesn't have to be this super high art, inaccessible thing to have value, and that you can find something of meaning for yourself and, maybe for society in like unlikely things. We say it to be funny because it's a pun on culture revolution, but that is kind of what we mean, right?
No, exactly, 100%. We will very much not kill people and, shun professors like the actual Cultural Revolution did, but we won't call you cringe.
Well, we won't shun you, listeners. We'll see where we get with the middlebrow Cultural Revolution. It's too soon to say.
Very true. We might be a featured subject on an MSNBC fucking special someday. Who the hell knows?
Dun, 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 dun. I think that was
So,
Unsolved Mysteries.
that's another true crime. Maybe we'll have to talk about that specifically on a true crime episode because I loved Unsolved Mysteries.
In retrospect, Unsolved Mysteries is so real quick because I just thought of it now. That's fucking crazy because that's like both early true crime with a pretense of journalism, but it's also like halfway to Tales from the Crypt, horror anthology, true crime journalism. Like, what the fuck?
Oh, terrifying shit, in all honesty. I'm dead fucking serious. But either way, before once again we become victims of true crime, have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight. And don't let parasocially true crime fucking freak fans bite. So have a good night.
Don't let the YouTube pedophile hunters show up at your house and accuse you of being a pedophile, which I don't know if you are or not.
Yeah, for dating a 19-year-old, because it's technically a teenager.
Yeah.
So have a good night, everybody.
All right, good night, everyone.